One of her twins needed a donor, but the only match was the millionaire CEO who shattered her heart. "Mrs. Carter, I'm afraid we've found a compatible donor," Dr. Martinez said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of relief and concern that made Emma's stomach clench with unexpected dread. Emma looked up from where she'd been holding 5-year-old Lily's hand as her daughter slept fitfully in the hospital bed, the latest round of chemotherapy having left her exhausted and pale. "That's wonderful news. When can we schedule the procedure?" "Well, there's something unusual about this situation," Dr. Martinez continued, glancing at his clipboard with an expression that suggested the news wasn't as straightforward as Emma had hoped. "The donor has agreed to the procedure, but there are some complications regarding the coordination of care." "What kind of complications?" Emma asked, though something in the doctor's tone made her suspect this wasn't about medical logistics. "The donor is someone you know, Mrs. Carter. Someone you specifically requested we contact if he was ever identified as a potential match." Emma's blood turned to ice water in her veins. There was only one person she'd ever mentioned to the medical team. Only one name she'd given them in a moment of desperate maternal instinct overriding 5 years of pride and pain. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady beep of Lily's monitors. "Please tell me it's not. Alexander Stone has been confirmed as a perfect bone marrow match for Lily," Dr. Martinez said gently. "He's already completed the preliminary testing and has agreed to proceed with the donation. He'll be here tomorrow morning to discuss the timeline and coordinate the procedure." Before we dive deeper into this impossible situation that will test everything you believe about love, forgiveness, and a mother's desperation, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is. Are you already feeling the weight of Emma's impossible choice? Drop it in the comments. We love connecting with our Lux Love Chronicles family, who understand that sometimes life forces us to face our greatest pain to find our greatest healing. Now, let me take you back to how we got to this moment, because to understand why the name Alexander Stone hits Emma like a physical blow, you need to know about the love affair that destroyed her faith in fairy tales and the secret she's been carrying for 5 years. But first, let me explain how we got to this medical miracle that feels more like a cruel twist of fate. 3 weeks earlier, when 5-year-old Lily Carter had collapsed during dance class, Emma had initially thought it was just exhaustion. Her daughter had always been the more delicate of the twins, where Sophie was robust and energetic. Lily was thoughtful and tired easily. But when the bruises appeared overnight and Lily's fever spiked to dangerous levels, Emma had rushed her to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia with the kind of bone-deep terror only mothers understand. The diagnosis had hit like a lightning strike: acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The most common form of childhood cancer, Dr. Martinez had explained, but also the most treatable when caught early. Lily would need aggressive chemotherapy followed by a bone marrow transplant to ensure the cancer never returned. The good news is that siblings are often perfect matches, Dr. Martinez had said during that first devastating consultation. "We'll test Sophie immediately." But Sophie, despite being Lily's identical twin, had not been a match. The genetic lottery that had made them look exactly alike had somehow failed to provide the bone marrow compatibility that could save Lily's life. "How is that possible?" Emma had asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. "They're identical twins. While identical twins share most of their DNA, the specific markers that determine bone marrow compatibility can sometimes differ," Dr. Martinez had explained patiently. "It's rare, but it happens. We'll immediately begin searching the National Bone Marrow Registry for other potential donors." That search had led nowhere. Week after week, as Lily's condition stabilized but didn't improve, the calls came back negative. No matches in the United States. No matches internationally. The combination of genetic markers that made Lily unique also made finding a compatible donor nearly impossible. It was during the 3rd week of searching, when Emma was exhausted from sleeping in hospital chairs and managing Sophie's confusion about why her sister was so sick, that she'd made a decision that had cost her every ounce of pride she possessed. "Dr. Martinez," she'd said during one of their daily consultations, "there's someone else you should test. Someone who might be genetically compatible. A family member we haven't considered?" Emma had taken a shaky breath, knowing that speaking his name aloud would open a door she'd kept locked for 5 years. "Alexander Stone. He might share genetic markers with the girls. Dr. Martinez had looked confused. Is he related to you? A cousin, or he's their father? Emma had said quietly, the words feeling like broken glass in her throat. But he doesn't know they exist. That admission had led to the most difficult conversation of Emma's life. Explaining to the medical team that she'd raised twins alone for 5 years without the father's knowledge. Revealing that Alexander Stone, the Alexander Stone, CEO of Stone Technology Solutions, worth approximately $2.8 billion, had no idea he'd fathered children during their brief, secret affair 6 years ago. Mrs. Carter, Dr. Martinez had said carefully, if Mr. Stone is the children's biological father, there's a very good chance he could be a compatible donor. But we'd need his permission to test him, and given the circumstances, that might be complicated. I know, Emma had replied, staring at her hands to avoid meeting the doctor's sympathetic gaze. But Lily needs a donor, and if there's even a chance he could help her, I have to try. What Emma hadn't known was that Alexander Stone had been registered in the National Bone Marrow Donor Database for 3 years. He'd enrolled during a corporate charity drive after his business partner's 8-year-old son had been diagnosed with leukemia. It had been a gesture of solidarity, a way to support his grieving friend, never imagining that his donation might one day save a life, especially not the life of a child he didn't know existed. When the registry's sophisticated matching system had identified Alexander as a potential donor for a 5-year-old patient in Philadelphia, he'd received a standard phone call from the donation center. Mr. Stone, this is Janet from the National Marrow Donor Program. We have a pediatric patient who appears to be a preliminary match for your genetic markers. Would you be willing to undergo additional testing to confirm compatibility? Alexander had agreed immediately, just as he had when he'd first registered. The testing had been conducted at a lab near his Manhattan office, and he'd thought nothing more about it until the call came confirming he was indeed a perfect match. The patient is a 5-year-old girl with acute lymphoblastic leukemia, Janet had explained. The procedure would involve bone marrow extraction, which requires general anesthesia and a brief hospital stay, but most donors recover completely within a few weeks. When do we schedule it? Alexander had asked without hesitation. There's one unusual aspect to this case, Mr. Stone. The patient's mother has specifically requested to meet with you before the procedure. Normally, donor and recipient families remain anonymous, but she's invoked the emergency family consultation protocol. Alexander had been puzzled but agreeable. Whatever the family needs. When and where? That conversation had been 2 days ago. Alexander had no idea that in agreeing to meet the patient's family, he was about to come face to face with the woman who'd haunted his dreams for 5 years and discover he was about to save the life of his own daughter. If you've ever wondered how far a mother would go to save her child, you need to hear this story. Hit that like button because what happens next will test every belief you have about love, forgiveness, and second chances. To understand why Alexander Stone's name could reduce Emma Carter to a trembling mess in a hospital corridor, you need to know about the love affair that had shaped both their lives 6 years ago, when Emma had been a 26-year-old executive assistant and Alexander had been a 32-year-old tech mogul on the rise. Emma had started working for Stone Technology Solutions fresh out of business school, drawn by the company's innovative approach to cybersecurity and Alexander's reputation as a visionary leader. She'd been hired as an executive assistant, but her MBA and quick intelligence had soon made her indispensable to Alexander's daily operations. Their relationship had begun professionally and remained that way for nearly 8 months. Alexander was focused, demanding, brilliant, and completely dedicated to building his company into a major player in the tech industry. Emma had admired his drive, his strategic mind, and his ability to see technological possibilities that others missed. She'd also been attracted to him physically, though she'd never allowed herself to acknowledge it. Alexander Stone was tall and lean, with dark hair that he ran his hands through when he was thinking, green eyes that seemed to see through every corporate facade, and an intensity that made even routine business meetings feel electric. The shift in their relationship had happened gradually, then all at once. Late nights working on product launches had turned into shared dinners at his office. Business trips had become opportunities for long conversations about everything from market strategies to childhood dreams. Emma had found herself looking forward to Monday mornings because they meant seeing Alexander again. The first time he'd kissed her had been after a particularly successful client presentation. They'd been alone in the conference room, celebrating the multi-million-dollar contract they'd just secured, when Alexander had suddenly cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a passion that had taken her breath away. "I've wanted to do that for months," he'd whispered against her lips. "Alexander, we can't." Emma had begun, but he'd kissed her again, and all her professional reservations had dissolved under the intensity of feelings she'd been suppressing for too long. Their affair had lasted 10 months, conducted in secret due to company policies and the significant difference in their positions. Alexander had been careful to ensure their professional relationship remained pristine, no favoritism, no inappropriate behavior in the office, no hint that their after-hours connection existed. But privately, they'd been inseparable. Alexander had shown Emma a side of himself that few people ever saw: vulnerable, thoughtful, surprisingly romantic. He'd cooked dinner for her in his penthouse apartment, had listened to her dreams of eventually starting her own consulting firm, had made her feel like she was his partner in both business and life. Emma had fallen completely, desperately in love with him. She'd imagined a future where they could be public about their relationship, where she might transition into a more senior role at the company, where they might build something lasting together. She'd been naive about the realities of dating a billionaire. The beginning of the end had come when Alexander's company had caught the attention of Ashworth Industries, a family-owned conglomerate looking to expand into technology. The potential merger would have valued Stone Technology at $1.2 billion and would have made Alexander one of the youngest tech moguls in the country. But the Ashworth family had old-fashioned ideas about business partnerships. They wanted to see Alexander settled, stable, connected to the right social circles. They'd made it clear that the merger would be smoother if Alexander were married to someone who understood the responsibilities that came with generational wealth. Enter Victoria Ashworth, daughter of the company's founder, beautiful in the way that expensive breeding and personal trainers could create, educated at the finest schools, and groomed from birth to be the perfect wife for a powerful man. Emma had known something was wrong when Alexander had started canceling their dinner plans, when their late-night conversations had become brief and professional, when he'd looked at her with something that seemed almost like guilt during business meetings. The truth had come out on a Thursday evening in March when Emma had arrived at Alexander's penthouse with Chinese takeout and plans to celebrate the preliminary merger agreements. She'd found him sitting at his kitchen counter with a bottle of expensive scotch and an expression that had made her stomach drop with dread. "Emma, we need to talk," he'd said, his voice carrying the tone of a man about to deliver a death sentence. "About the merger? I saw the preliminary numbers, and they're incredible. About us," Alexander had interrupted. "About this relationship." Emma had set down the bag of food with hands that were already beginning to shake. "What about us?" "It has to end. Tonight." The words had hit her like physical blows. "I don't understand. Yesterday you said you loved me. Yesterday you talked about us taking a vacation together after the merger was finalized. Yesterday I was living in a fantasy," Alexander had replied, his voice cold in a way she'd never heard before. "Today I'm facing reality." "What reality?" "The reality that you're my assistant, and I'm about to become one of the most powerful men in the tech industry. The reality that what we have, whatever we have, isn't sustainable at the level I'm moving toward." Emma had stared at him, searching his face for any sign of the man who'd held her so tenderly just the night before. "Alexander, if this is about the company policies, we can figure that out. I can find another position, or we can disclose the relationship to HR. This isn't about company policies, Emma. This is about compatibility. About what works in the real world versus what works in the bubble we've been living in. I don't understand what you're saying." Alexander had drained his scotch glass before meeting her eyes with a look that had shattered something fundamental inside her chest. "I'm saying that people like me don't end up with people like you. Not in the long term. Not when there are business considerations and family expectations and social responsibilities that go beyond what two people feel in private moments. People like me," Emma had repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're wonderful, Emma. You're intelligent and beautiful, and you've been an incredible partner in every way. But you come from a different world. You don't understand the pressures that come with generational wealth, the social obligations, the strategic marriages that strengthen business empires rather than just satisfying personal desires. Each word had been like a knife between her ribs. Strategic marriages? Victoria Ashworth and I will be announcing our engagement next month. The merger will be finalized 6 weeks after the wedding. Emma had gripped the kitchen counter to keep from falling. You're marrying someone else. I'm marrying someone who understands the responsibilities that come with my position. Someone who can be a true partner in building the kind of legacy I want to create. And I can't be that person. Alexander had looked away, unable to meet her eyes. You knew this was temporary, Emma. We both knew that eventually, I'd need to make choices based on more than just what we felt for each other. No, Emma had said, her voice growing stronger with anger and disbelief. I didn't know this was temporary. I thought we were building something real. I thought you loved me. I do love you. That's what makes this so difficult. If you loved me, you wouldn't be throwing me away for a business deal. I'm not throwing you away. I'm being realistic about what's possible and what isn't. Emma had grabbed her purse and headed for the door, needing to escape before the tears that were building in her chest could humiliate her further. Emma, wait. Alexander had called after her. We still need to work together. The merger will take months to complete, and I need you too. You need me to what? She turned back to face him, her pain finally transforming into the kind of rage that could burn through anything. Help you plan your wedding? Coordinate meetings with your fiancé? Pretend that everything between us meant nothing. I need you to be professional about this. To understand that business has to come first. Business comes first, Emma had repeated slowly. Always business first with you, isn't it, Alexander? Even when it comes to love. Love doesn't pay for the lifestyle you've been enjoying, Emma. Love doesn't build companies or create jobs or change industries. And love apparently doesn't matter when there's money to be made. She'd left that night and had submitted her resignation the next morning. 2 weeks later, she'd discovered she was pregnant. Emma had stared at the positive pregnancy test in the bathroom of her small apartment, her hands shaking as the implications had crashed over her. She was carrying Alexander Stone's baby, the baby of a man who'd made it brutally clear that she wasn't worth choosing over a business opportunity. Her first instinct had been to call him, to tell him about the pregnancy, to hope that discovering he was going to be a father might change his perspective about what mattered most. But then she'd remembered his words. People like me don't end up with people like you. Emma had realized that telling Alexander about the pregnancy would force him into an impossible situation. He'd either feel trapped into abandoning his merger and engagement, which would breed resentment that would poison any relationship they tried to build, or he'd find a way to handle the problem that would protect his business interests and social standing. Neither option had seemed like it would result in a healthy environment for raising a child. But Emma's pregnancy had held one more surprise. At the 20-week ultrasound, she'd learned she was carrying twins. 2 babies who would grow up without their father because their mother was too proud to trap a man who'd made his priorities crystal clear. Emma had used her severance package and savings to move to Philadelphia, where the cost of living was lower and where she could disappear into anonymity while she figured out how to raise 2 children alone. She'd started a small business consulting firm, working from home while pregnant and gradually building a client base that allowed her to support her growing family. Lily and Sophie Carter had been born on a snowy February morning, 2 perfect little girls who'd never known they had a father worth billions of dollars. Emma had chosen not to list a father on their birth certificates, had raised them to believe that sometimes families were just mommies and babies, and that was perfectly normal and complete. For 5 years, Emma's plan had worked perfectly. The twins were happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. Emma's consulting firm had grown successful enough to provide a comfortable middle-class life. They lived in a modest house in a good neighborhood. The girls attended excellent schools, and Emma had convinced herself that they were better off without Alexander Stone's complicated world of wealth and social expectations. Until Lily had gotten sick. Until the only thing that could save her daughter's life was bone marrow from the man who destroyed Emma's faith and love and whom she'd spent 5 years trying to forget. The conversation they're about to have will determine if an innocent child lives or dies. Are you holding your breath? Comment below if you think he'll help her despite their painful history. Now, As Emma sat in the hospital corridor waiting for Alexander to arrive for their first face-to-face meeting in 5 years, she felt like she was drowning in the weight of decisions she'd made and secrets she'd kept. Dr. Martinez had explained that the donor, Alexander, would arrive at 10 a.m. for what he believed was a standard pre-procedure consultation with the patient's family. He had no idea that the family he was meeting included his own children. "Mrs. Carter," Dr. Martinez had said gently, "I want to prepare you for how difficult this conversation might be. Mr. Stone believes he's here to discuss donating bone marrow to a child whose family specifically requested to meet him. He doesn't know why you requested the meeting, and he certainly doesn't know about his biological connection to the twins." "I understand," Emma had replied, though she wasn't sure she understood anything anymore. "How do you want to handle this? Do you want to tell him about his paternity before or after we discuss the medical procedures?" Emma had considered the question for days, and she still didn't have a good answer. "I think we should focus on Lily first, on what she needs and what the procedure involves. The rest, we'll figure out the rest as we go." "And the twins? Do they know they're meeting their father today?" "They know a man is coming who might be able to help Lily get better," Emma had said carefully. "They don't know anything beyond that." Now, at 9:47 a.m., Emma sat in the family consultation room with both twins, trying to keep her hands from shaking as she watched the door for Alexander's arrival. Lily was in a wheelchair. The latest round of chemo had left her weak, but she was alert and curious about the meeting. Sophie sat protectively beside her sister, holding her hand the way she had throughout this entire ordeal. "Mommy, you look scared," Sophie observed with the brutal honesty of 5-year-olds. "Is the man who's coming scary?" "No, sweetheart," Emma replied, smoothing Sophie's dark hair that was exactly the same shade as Alexander's. "He's not scary. Mommy's just nervous about talking to someone she used to know." "Did you used to be friends?" Lily asked. Emma's throat tightened with the complexity of that question. "Something like that." "Maybe you can be friends again," Sophie suggested with the optimism of childhood. "Sometimes when people help each other, they become friends." Before Emma could respond, there was a soft knock on the consultation room door. Dr. Martinez's voice called out, "Mrs. Carter? Mr. Stone is here." Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she stood up, smoothing her sweater and trying to prepare herself for seeing Alexander again after 5 years. Nothing could have prepared her for the reality. The door opened, and Alexander Stone walked into the room looking exactly like Emma's memories and completely different at the same time. He was still tall and lean, still carried himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. His dark hair was shorter now, with subtle threads of silver at the temples that only made him more distinguished. He wore an expensive but understated charcoal suit that emphasized his athletic build without being flashy. But his face was different. Older, obviously, but also marked by something that looked like weariness or regret. The sharp ambition that had once radiated from him seemed tempered by something softer, more thoughtful. Alexander's gaze found Emma first, and she watched as recognition dawned in his green eyes, the same green eyes that stared back at her every day from Sophie's face. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying a dozen complicated emotions. "I had no idea. When they said the family wanted to meet with me, I never imagined." "Hello, Alexander," Emma managed, her voice steadier than she'd expected. "Thank you for coming, for agreeing to help." Alexander's gaze moved past Emma to the 2 little girls sitting quietly in the hospital chairs, and Emma watched as his entire world shifted on its axis. The resemblance was unmistakable. Both twins had Emma's delicate features and her smile, but they had Alexander's coloring, his hair, and most strikingly, his distinctive green eyes. Sophie particularly looked like she could have been Alexander's childhood photographs brought to life. Alexander stared at the twins for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and dawning realization. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Emma, how old are they?" 5, Emma replied, watching as Alexander did the mathematical calculation that would confirm what his eyes were already telling him. 5 years old, he repeated slowly, his gaze moving between the twins and Emma. Which means they were born about 8.5 months after our last conversation," Emma said quietly. Sophie, who had been watching this exchange with growing curiosity, suddenly stood up from her chair and walked directly to Alexander. She stopped in front of him and tilted her head back to study his face with the frank assessment that only children could manage. "You have my eyes," she said matter-of-factly. "And my hair. Are you our daddy?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Alexander looked down at Sophie, then at Lily still seated in her wheelchair, then back at Emma with an expression of such profound shock that Emma almost felt sorry for him. "Yes," Alexander said finally, his voice cracking slightly on the single word. "I think I am." Sophie's innocent question, "Are you our daddy?" had shattered the careful composure Alexander Stone had maintained throughout a decade of high-stakes business negotiations. He stared down at the little girl whose green eyes were mirror images of his own, his throat working soundlessly as he struggled to process the magnitude of what he was discovering. "Yes," he said again, the word coming out stronger this time as the reality settled into his bones. "I think I am your daddy." Sophie's face lit up with the uncomplicated joy that only 5-year-olds could manage. "I knew it. Lily, look. We found our daddy, and he's going to make you better." From her wheelchair, Lily smiled weakly but genuinely. "Hi, Daddy," she said simply, as if greeting a father she'd been waiting her whole life to meet was the most natural thing in the world. Alexander felt his knees go weak. These two perfect little girls, his daughters, were looking at him with trust and acceptance he hadn't done anything to earn. He'd missed 5 years of their lives, 5 years of birthdays and bedtime stories and scraped knees and Christmas mornings, and they were welcoming him like he'd just been away on a long trip. Alexander started, then stopped, overwhelmed by emotions he'd never experienced before. He looked at Emma, who was watching this interaction with tears streaming down her face. "Emma, why didn't you tell me?" Before Emma could answer, Dr. Martinez cleared his throat gently. "Perhaps we should sit down and discuss the medical situation first. We can address the personal aspects of this reunion after we've covered what Lily needs for her treatment." Alexander dragged his attention away from his daughters with visible effort. "Yes, of course. The bone marrow donation. That's why I'm here." "Actually, Mr. Stone," Dr. Martinez said carefully, "now that we understand the family dynamics involved, there are some additional considerations we need to discuss." "What kind of considerations?" "You're not just a compatible donor anymore. You're Lily's biological father, which changes both the medical and legal aspects of this situation significantly." Alexander sat down heavily in one of the consultation room chairs, his business-trained mind trying to process the implications while his heart reeled from meeting his children. "How does it change things?" "Medically, it confirms why you're such a perfect match. Parent-child bone marrow compatibility is extremely high, which means the chances of Lily's body accepting your donation are excellent. Legally, it means you now have parental rights and responsibilities that didn't exist when you were simply an anonymous donor." Emma's face went pale. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that Mr. Stone can now make medical decisions for Lily alongside you, Mrs. Carter. It also means that after the immediate crisis is resolved, you'll need to address custody arrangements, financial support, and other parental obligations." Alexander held up a hand. "Let's focus on saving Lily's life first. Everything else can be sorted out later." "Absolutely," Dr. Martinez agreed. "The bone marrow extraction procedure is relatively straightforward. We'll harvest stem cells from your hip bone under general anesthesia. The process takes about 2 hours, and you'll need to stay in the hospital overnight for observation. Lily's transplant will happen simultaneously. As we're extracting your bone marrow, we'll be preparing her to receive it." "What are the risks?" Alexander asked. "For you, minimal. Some pain and stiffness at the extraction site, fatigue for a few days, but most donors recover completely within 2 weeks. For Lily, the risks are more significant because of her compromised immune system, but given the perfect genetic match, we're very optimistic about her chances." Sophie had been listening to this conversation with the serious attention children gave to important adult discussions they didn't entirely understand. "Does it hurt?" she asked Alexander. "When they take the bone marrow to give to Lily?" Alexander looked down at his newly discovered daughter, struck by her concern for his well-being. "A little bit," he admitted honestly, "but not as much as it would hurt to lose your sister." Sophie nodded solemnly. "We can take care of you while you get better. Mommy's really good at taking care of sick people." Alexander's gaze moved to Emma, taking in the exhaustion etched in her features, the careful strength she'd maintained throughout this crisis, the way she protected and raised their daughters without any help from him. "Your mommy is very good at taking care of people," he agreed quietly. Dr. Martinez continued explaining the medical timeline. The procedure would happen the next morning, followed by a critical 72-hour period where they'd monitor Lily's body's acceptance of the new bone marrow. If all went well, Lily could be in remission within a month and fully recovered within 6 months. "I'll need to make some arrangements," Alexander said when the medical briefing concluded. "Cancel meetings, reschedule commitments. How long should I plan to stay in Philadelphia?" "The extraction procedure requires 1 night in the hospital, but I'd recommend staying in the area for at least a week to monitor Lily's initial response," Dr. Martinez replied. "A week," Alexander repeated, glancing at Emma. "I'll need somewhere to stay. There are several hotels near the hospital," Emma said quietly. "Actually," Dr. Martinez interjected, "given the family situation, it might be beneficial for Mr. Stone to be easily accessible to both his daughters during this period. Sophie will need support too, and Lily may find comfort in having both parents nearby." The implication hung in the air that Alexander should stay close to Emma and the twins, that they should navigate this crisis as a family unit despite 5 years of separation and all the unresolved pain between them. "We have a guest room," Emma said finally, her voice careful and neutral. "If you think it would help the girls." Alexander looked at her, recognizing the sacrifice this offer represented. Having him in her home would be emotionally difficult for Emma, but she was putting Lily's needs first, just as she'd apparently been doing for 5 years. "Thank you," he said simply. "I'd like that very much." The moment Alexander sees his own eyes looking back at him from those little faces changes everything. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because the emotional tsunami that's coming will leave you speechless. After Dr. Martinez left to schedule the procedure, Alexander found himself alone with Emma and his daughters for the first time. The silence stretched uncomfortably as 5 years of unspoken words and unresolved pain filled the room. "I should call my office," Alexander said finally. "Let them know I'll be out for the rest of the week." "Daddy," Lily said softly, and Alexander's heart nearly stopped at hearing the word directed at him. "Are you sad that you didn't know about us?" Alexander knelt beside Lily's wheelchair, bringing himself to her eye level. "I'm sad that I missed so much time with you and Sophie," he said honestly. "But I'm not sad about finding out now. Meeting you is the best thing that's happened to me in a very long time." "Mommy used to cry sometimes," Sophie offered with the brutal honesty of childhood. "When we asked about our daddy, she said you lived very far away and couldn't visit us." Alexander's gaze moved to Emma, who was looking anywhere but at him. "Your mommy was protecting you," he said carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups make things more complicated than they need to be. Will you stay with us after Lily gets better?" Sophie asked. "Will you be our daddy every day instead of just when we're in the hospital?" The question hit Alexander like a physical blow. These children were asking for a commitment he wasn't sure he knew how to make, a level of emotional availability he'd never been required to provide. But looking at their hopeful faces, he found himself making a promise that surprised him with its certainty. "I want to be your daddy every day," he said quietly. "But that's something your mommy and I need to figure out together." Emma's composure finally cracked. "Girls, why don't you go see if the nurses have any new coloring books in the activity room? Daddy and I need to talk about some grown-up things." Sophie took charge of Lily's wheelchair with the practiced efficiency of a sister who'd been helping throughout this medical crisis. "Come on, Lily. Let's go draw pictures for Daddy so he has something to look at when he's getting his bone marrow taken out." After the twins left, Emma and Alexander stared at each other across the consultation room. 5 years of hurt and anger and unfinished business stretching between them like a chasm. "5 years, Emma," Alexander said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "5 years you kept this from me." "You made your position very clear," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength from familiar anger. "People like you don't end up with people like me, remember? I wasn't worth choosing over a business deal." "That's not," Alexander started, then stopped, recognizing the truth in her words. "I was wrong. About everything. About what mattered. About what I wanted about you." You were engaged to someone else 3 weeks after you threw me away like garbage, Emma said, years of suppressed pain finally surfacing. You married Victoria Ashworth. You built the life you said you wanted. Don't pretend you would have wanted to know about the pregnancy. I didn't marry Victoria, Alexander said quietly. Emma blinked in surprise. What? I called off the engagement 6 months after I announced it. The merger went through anyway. Turned out the Ashworths cared more about the technology patents than about my marital status. I've been divorced for 3 years. Divorced? But you said, I said a lot of things I didn't mean because I was scared and stupid and convinced that business success was the only thing that mattered. Alexander ran his hands through his hair in the gesture Emma remembered from their time together. I married Victoria because I thought I was supposed to. Because it made sense on paper. But I never loved her, Emma. I was still in love with you. Emma stared at him, processing this information that contradicted everything she'd believed for 5 years. You were in love with me? I never stopped being in love with you. The night I ended our relationship was the worst mistake of my life, but by the time I realized it, you'd disappeared. I tried to find you. I hired investigators. I called everyone who'd ever worked with you. I even went to your old apartment building. You'd vanished completely. I didn't want to be found, Emma said quietly. I was pregnant and heartbroken, and I couldn't bear the thought of you trying to fix the problem with money or legal agreements. Is that what you think I would have done? I think you would have done whatever protected your business interests and your reputation. Just like you did when you chose the merger over our relationship. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, acknowledging the truth in her assessment. You're right. 5 years ago, that's exactly what I would have done. I would have seen the pregnancy as a complication to be managed rather than a miracle to be celebrated. And now I've spent 5 years learning that all the money and success in the world means nothing if you don't have anyone to share it with. Now I've just met my daughters and realized I've been living half a life without even knowing it. Emma studied his face, looking for the calculation and ambition that had once driven every decision he made. What changed? Losing you changed me. Realizing that I'd thrown away the best thing in my life for a business deal that ended up meaning nothing. Spending 3 years married to someone I didn't love while thinking about you every single day. Alexander's voice grew raw with emotion. Discovering that I have 2 incredible daughters who've been growing up without their father because I was too arrogant and short-sighted to recognize what actually mattered. Alexander, I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't undo 5 years of absence or take back the things I said that night. But Emma, if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life making up for those mistakes. Before Emma could respond, Sophie and Lily returned with their artwork, colorful drawings of stick figures labeled Mommy, Lily, Sophie, and Daddy standing together in front of a house with an oversized sun shining down on them. Look, Daddy, Sophie said proudly. I drew our family. Alexander took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. It's beautiful, Sophie. Is this your house? It's the house we're going to live in when Lily gets better, Lily explained matter-of-factly. All of us together like real families. Alexander looked at Emma over the twins' heads, seeing his own emotions reflected in her eyes, hope and fear and the desperate desire to give these children the stable family they deserved, tempered by the realistic knowledge that love alone might not be enough to overcome 5 years of hurt and separation. We'll see, sweetheart, Emma said gently. Right now we need to focus on getting you healthy. The rest of the day passed in a blur of pre-surgical consultations, paperwork, and the strange intimacy of navigating a medical crisis as a newly reunited family. Alexander stayed close to the twins, marveling at their personalities and trying to absorb 5 years' worth of getting to know his children in the space of a few hours. Lily was quiet and thoughtful, an observer who seemed to understand more than her 5 years should have allowed. She asked Alexander about his work, about the buildings his company had helped design, about whether he liked books as much as she did. Sophie was more energetic despite the stress of her sister's illness, full of questions about where Alexander lived, whether he had any pets, whether he knew how to braid hair, and if he could teach her to tie her shoes the daddy way instead of the mommy way. Emma watched these interactions with a mixture of joy and terror. Alexander was good with the children, patient, genuinely engaged, treating them like complete people rather than miniature adults. But she'd seen his charm before, had fallen for his ability to make her feel like the most important person in his world right up until the moment she wasn't. That evening, they went to Emma's house, a modest two-story colonial in a quiet Philadelphia suburb that was everything Alexander's Manhattan penthouse wasn't. It was warm and lived in, with children's artwork covering the refrigerator, family photos on every surface, and the kind of comfortable chaos that spoke of real family life. "This is our home," Sophie announced, giving Alexander the grand tour with 5-year-old enthusiasm. "This is my room, and this is Lily's room, and this is Mommy's room, and this is the guest room where you'll sleep." Alexander took in every detail, the twins' bedroom walls covered with their artwork, the bookshelf overflowing with children's stories, the photos documenting 5 years of birthdays and holidays, and everyday moments he'd missed. "They're beautiful children," he said to Emma as they stood in the hallway looking at a photo collage of the twins' first 5 years. "They are," Emma agreed. "They're smart and kind and resilient. They've had a good life, Alexander. I want you to know that." "I can see that. You've done an incredible job raising them alone." "I wasn't completely alone. I had help, my mother, good friends, a wonderful daycare. But yes, most of it was just us." Alexander studied a photo of Emma at what looked like the twins' 3rd birthday party, surrounded by other mothers and children, smiling but with tired eyes that spoke of the weight of single parenthood. "Emma, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." "Okay. If I hadn't been a bone marrow match, if Lily hadn't gotten sick, would you ever have told me about them?" Emma was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "I told myself I was protecting them from the complications that come with your world. But maybe I was also protecting myself from having to see you again. And now everything's different. You've met them, they know you're their father, and there's no going back to the way things were. Do you want to go back?" Emma looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd walked into that hospital room. "I want what's best for Lily and Sophie. I want them to have a father who chooses them every day, not just when it's convenient or emotionally satisfying. I want them to grow up feeling secure and loved and never wondering if they're worth staying for." "They are," Alexander said firmly. "They're worth everything." That night, after the twins were asleep, Emma and Alexander sat in her living room drinking coffee and talking about logistics, custody arrangements, financial support, how to integrate Alexander into the children's lives without disrupting their stability. "I don't want your money," Emma said bluntly. "I've been supporting them fine on my own." "This isn't about what you want or need," Alexander replied gently. "It's about my responsibility to my children. I've missed 5 years of supporting them. I want to contribute to their future, college funds, activities, whatever they need. And if this doesn't work out, if we try to co-parent and it becomes too complicated or difficult, it will work out because we'll make it work out. Because they need both of us, and we're both going to put their needs first." Emma studied his face in the lamplight. "You sound different. More certain about personal things than you used to be. Losing you taught me what certainty actually feels like. For 5 years, I've been certain that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. Meeting our daughters just confirmed that." "Our daughters," Emma repeated softly. "Our daughters," Alexander confirmed. "I know I have to earn the right to be their father, Emma. I know that title comes with daily choices and consistency and putting them first even when it's inconvenient. But I want to earn it." The next morning arrived gray and cold, matching the anxiety that had kept both Emma and Alexander awake most of the night. They returned to the hospital early, where Alexander underwent final pre-surgical tests while the twins tried to distract themselves with coloring books and tablet games. "Are you scared, Daddy?" Lily asked as Alexander was being prepped for the bone marrow extraction. "A little bit," Alexander admitted, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "But I'm more excited than scared because this is going to help you get better." "I'm scared too," Lily confessed. "What if it doesn't work?" Alexander took her small hands in his larger ones. "Then we'll try something else. But Lily, I want you to know something very important." "What?" "No matter what happens with the procedure, I'm going to be your daddy forever now. I'm going to be here for every doctor's appointment and every birthday and every time you need someone to read you a story or help you with homework. You're never going to have to wonder if your daddy loves you, because I'm going to make sure you know it every single day." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Promise. I promise." Sophie hugged Alexander fiercely before he was taken into surgery. "Take care of Lily's bone marrow, Daddy. Make sure it's the very best kind." "I will, sweetheart." The bone marrow extraction took 3 hours, longer than expected because Alexander's bone marrow was so healthy that the doctors were able to harvest extra stem cells to ensure the best possible outcome for Lily. Meanwhile, Lily underwent the preparatory chemotherapy that would eliminate her existing immune system and prepare her body to accept her father's bone marrow. Emma spent those 3 hours in the surgical waiting area, alternating between pacing and sitting in uncomfortable plastic chairs, her mind cycling through every possible complication and outcome. When Dr. Martinez finally appeared with news that both procedures had gone perfectly, Emma burst into tears of relief. "Alexander is in recovery and asking for you," Dr. Martinez said. "And Lily is receiving the bone marrow transfusion now. We should know within 24 hours if her body is accepting the new cells." Emma found Alexander in a hospital bed, pale but alert, with bandages covering the extraction sites on his lower back. He was trying to sit up when she entered the room. "How is she?" he asked immediately. "The transfusion is happening now. Dr. Martinez says the next 24 hours are critical." Alexander nodded, then winced as the movement pulled at his surgical sites. "Where are the girls?" "Sophie's with my mother in the family room. I told her you'd want to see her as soon as you were awake." "I do. But Emma, first I need to tell you something." "What?" Lying in that operating room, knowing that part of me was going into Lily to save her life, it made me realize something I should have understood 5 years ago. "What's that?" "Family isn't something you fit into your schedule when it's convenient. It's not a bonus you add to your life after you've achieved everything else you want. Family is the life. Everything else, money, success, recognition, it's all just scaffolding around what actually matters." Emma sat down in the chair beside his bed. "Alexander, I know you don't trust me yet. I know I have to prove that I've changed, that I can be the father Lily and Sophie deserve and the partner you deserve. But Emma, I need you to know that this isn't about guilt or obligation or trying to fix my mistakes. What is it about? It's about the fact that meeting our daughters and seeing what an incredible mother you've become has reminded me who I am when I'm with you. I'm not the calculating businessman who puts deals before people. I'm not the man who's afraid of choosing love over security. With you, I'm the man I always wanted to be but was too scared to become." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing his words against 5 years of hurt and self-protection. "And if the girls and I don't fit into your life as neatly as you hope, if being a family is messier and more complicated than you're imagining, then we'll figure it out together. We'll make mistakes, and we'll learn from them, and we'll keep choosing each other every day until it gets easier." Before Emma could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway with Emma's mother, eager to see her daddy after his surgery. "Are you okay, Daddy?" Sophie asked, climbing carefully onto the hospital bed beside Alexander. "I'm perfect," Alexander replied, wrapping his arm around his daughter. "How's Lily?" "She's sleeping. Grandma says the new bone marrow is like seeds that have to grow in Lily's body to make her strong again." "That's exactly right. And while we're waiting for those seeds to grow, I'm going to tell you and Lily stories about all the things I want to do with you when she's feeling better." "What kind of things?" "Well, I want to teach you both how to ride bikes and take you to see the ocean and help you build the tallest sandcastle anyone has ever built. I want to take you to work with me sometimes so you can see what Daddy does during the day, and I want to learn how to braid hair and paint fingernails and all the important daddy skills I missed out on." Sophie giggled. "You don't know how to braid hair?" "Not yet, but I'm a very fast learner." Over the next 72 hours, as they waited for signs that Lily's body was accepting Alexander's bone marrow, their makeshift family fell into a rhythm of shared hospital vigils and tentative bonding. Alexander proved surprisingly adept at entertaining a recovering 5-year-old. He read stories with dramatic voices, played endless games of I Spy, and listened patiently to Lily's detailed explanations of her favorite books and movies. Sophie divided her time between her father and sister, delighted to finally have both parents available to answer her constant stream of questions and meet her need for attention during this scary time. Emma watched these interactions with growing amazement and cautious hope. Alexander wasn't performing fatherhood. He was living it, adjusting his approach to each child's personality, learning their preferences and fears, becoming genuinely invested in their well-being beyond the medical crisis. On the third day, Dr. Martinez delivered the news they'd all been hoping for. Lily's body was not only accepting Alexander's bone marrow, but the new cells were already beginning to produce healthy blood cells. "She's going to be okay," Dr. Martinez said, his smile matching the relief on every face in the room. "We'll need to monitor her closely for the next few months, but all indicators suggest the transplant was a complete success." Lily, who had been gaining strength daily as the new bone marrow took hold, threw her arms around Alexander. "Thank you for saving me, Daddy. Thank you for letting me be your daddy," Alexander replied, his voice thick with emotion. That evening, as they prepared to finally go home as a family, Emma found herself alone with Alexander in Lily's hospital room while the twins said goodbye to their favorite nurses. "So what happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now we go home and figure out how to be a family," Alexander replied. "I'm going to find a house in Philadelphia, something close to your neighborhood so the girls don't have to change schools. I'm going to reorganize my business so I can work from here most of the time. And I'm going to spend every day earning the right to be part of this family. And us? What happens with us?" Alexander looked at her with an expression that held all the love and regret and hope of their shared history. "That's up to you, Emma. I know I love you. I never stopped loving you. I know I want to build a life with you and our daughters. But I also know that love isn't enough if you can't trust me to choose you and them over everything else." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching Lily and Sophie through the hospital room window as they hugged their nurses goodbye. "I'm scared," she admitted finally. "Of what? Of believing this is real. Of letting myself hope that you've really changed, that this time you'll stay. Of our daughters getting their hearts broken if this doesn't work out. I'm scared too," Alexander admitted. "I'm scared of messing this up, of not being the father they need, of losing you again. But Emma, I'd rather be scared with you than certain without you." Emma turned to face him fully, seeing vulnerability and determination in his expression. "If we do this, if we try to be a family, there have to be rules." "Name them." "The girls come first. Always. Every decision we make has to be about what's best for them, not what's easiest or most convenient for us." "Agreed. No more secrets. No more protecting each other from complicated truths. If we're going to be partners, we have to be honest partners." "Absolutely. And Alexander, if you ever decide that this life isn't what you want, if you ever realize that family commitments are too restrictive or demanding, you have to tell me immediately. You can't stay out of obligation or guilt. Our daughters deserve a father who chooses them because he wants them, not because he has to have them." Alexander stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his green eyes. "Emma, 5 years ago, I was an idiot who thought that success meant accumulating things, money, recognition, power. I thought family was something you added to a successful life, not something that made life successful. And now? Now I know that everything I've accomplished means nothing compared to hearing Lily call me daddy or seeing Sophie's face light up when I walk into a room. Now I know that the only success that matters is building something lasting with the people you love." Emma studied his face, looking for any trace of the calculating ambition that had once driven every decision he made. Instead, she saw the same man who had held her through sleepless nights 6 years ago, who had listened to her dreams and fears, who had made her believe in love before he'd broken her heart. But she also saw something new, a depth and certainty that hadn't existed before, the wisdom that came from loss and regret, and the determination to be better. "One day at a time," she said finally. "One day at a time," Alexander agreed. "And if it works? If we can really do this?" Alexander smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she'd seen from him since he'd walked into that hospital room 3 days ago. "Then we'll be the luckiest family in the world." 6 months later, Emma Stone, she'd taken Alexander's name when they remarried in a small ceremony with just the twins and Emma's mother as witnesses, stood in the kitchen of their new house, a spacious colonial in the same neighborhood where the twins had started kindergarten, watching her family through the window. Alexander was in the backyard with Lily and Sophie, teaching them to garden in the raised beds they'd built together. Lily, now in complete remission and healthier than she'd ever been, was carefully planting tomato seedlings while explaining to her father the proper spacing requirements she'd learned from a library book. Sophie was more interested in digging holes than planting anything, but Alexander listened to her chatter about earthworms and soil composition with the same serious attention he'd once reserved for board meetings. "Mommy, come help us plant the flowers," Lily called from the garden. "Coming, sweetheart," Emma called back, removing her apron and heading outside to join her family. Alexander looked up as she approached, soil streaking his hands and the kind of genuine contentment on his face that no business deal had ever produced. "How was the conference call with the new client?" "Excellent. They want to hire us for a 6-month project redesigning their employee wellness programs." Emma's consulting firm had grown significantly since she and Alexander had married. Having his business connections hadn't hurt, but her reputation for innovative human resources solutions had been built on her own merit. "That's wonderful. Will it require travel?" "Some, but nothing we can't manage around the girl's schedule." This was how they made decisions now. As partners who understood that family logistics came first and business opportunities were evaluated based on how they fit into their shared life rather than forcing their life to accommodate work demands. "Daddy, look." Sophie held up a handful of earthworms. "I found the helpers for our garden." "Those are excellent helpers," Alexander agreed seriously. "Should we make them a special place to live?" As Emma knelt beside Lily to help with the tomato planting, she reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that terrifying day when Lily had been diagnosed with leukemia. The medical crisis that had forced them back together had ultimately given them the chance to build something stronger and more authentic than what they'd lost 5 years earlier. Alexander had kept every promise he'd made. He'd relocated his business operations to Philadelphia, restructuring his company to allow him to work primarily from home. He'd learned to braid hair after watching several YouTube tutorials, had attended every parent-teacher conference and school play, and had become the kind of father who knew his daughter's favorite bedtime stories by heart. More importantly, he'd proven that his priorities had fundamentally shifted. When business crises arose that demanded his immediate attention, he'd found ways to handle them without abandoning family commitments. When opportunities for expansion or acquisition presented themselves, he'd evaluated them based on whether they would enhance or diminish his ability to be present for his wife and daughters. "Emma," Alexander said quietly as they worked together in the garden while the twins played nearby, "do you ever regret it? Taking the chance on us again?" Emma looked at him, taking in the man who'd learned to put tomato planting ahead of quarterly reports, who'd chosen love over ambition and family over empire. "Never," she said firmly. "Do you? My only regret is that it took a medical crisis for me to find you again. I wish I'd been brave enough to choose you and the girls from the beginning. But if you had been, we might not have appreciated what we have now. Maybe we both needed to grow into the people who could build this kind of family." Alexander nodded, understanding the wisdom in her words. "Besides, I like our story. It has a happy ending." "Daddy, Mommy," Lily called out. "Come see what Sophie and I planted." They walked over to discover that the twins had created an elaborate garden design involving flowers arranged in the shape of a heart, with family spelled out in marigold seeds. "It's perfect," Emma said, hugging both girls. "When the flowers grow, it will say that we're a family that loves each other," Sophie explained proudly. "We are indeed," Alexander agreed, wrapping his arms around all 3 of his girls. If this story reminded you that sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest blessings, and that true love can survive even the deepest wounds, smash that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs hope. What moment in this story touched you most? Drop it in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the people who save our lives are the ones we thought we'd lost forever. The truest test of love isn't whether it survives good times, but whether it can grow stronger through crisis and forgiveness. Emma and Alexander discovered that when you choose family over pride, healing over hurt, and love over fear, you don't just get a second chance, you get a better chance, built on the foundation of who you've become rather than who you used to be. This has been another story from Luxe Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth, where love always finds a way and families are built through choice, commitment, and the courage to put each other first. Until next time, Remember that it's never too late to become the person your family needs you to be. And sometimes the most precious gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected circumstances.